Cameron's £9 million leaflet run to stay in Europe. The Leave campaign cry foul. Cabinet colleagues who want out weren't consulted by the Prime Minister. The leaflet sets out his facts in favour of the EU. The cost is over and above the cash the two sides will share to fight the referendum.
The public are very clear. 85% of them have said they want more facts from the government.
I mean, it does show how desperate Project Fear is, but it's wrong. It's morally and democratically wrong.
Also tonight, decision time on the victims of Hillsborough. The hearings have ended. The relatives await the jury's verdicts.
A surge in junior doctors saying they'll take their skills abroad as a fourth strike cancels more operations.
And Harry hails the wounded heroes who'll fly the flag at next month's Invictus Games.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Nina Hussain.
Good evening. The EU referendum exploded in acrimony tonight as the Prime Minister spent taxpayers' money to support his side of the argument. He sunk £9 million into a national leaflet run and social media campaign to urge people to vote to stay in the European Union.
That amount is on top of the official £7 million limit imposed on the two sides. Those wanting to leave say that is unfair, giving the Remain camp a huge advantage. Our political editor, Robert Peston, reports on the referendum row.
Holiday's almost over. An already heated battle over whether we should remain in or leave the European Union is about to go nuclear as the government commits more than £9 million of taxpayers' money for arguing the case that we should stay in the EU.
Well, the government's official position is that we do believe the remaining in a reformed EU is the right thing for Britain, it's the right thing for our jobs, for our security. The public are very clear. 85% of them have said they want more facts from the government.
So each household will get this glossy leaflet. It makes claims such as that leaving the UK would be an economic shock, putting pressure on the value of the pound and damaging living standards. Ministers say those are facts. Others see them as propaganda. The leaflet will go to 27 million homes. It'll cost around £500,000 to produce, just under £6 million for printing and postage, and almost £3 million for a social media and online campaign, for a grand total of £9.3 million, considerably more than the £7 million each of the so-called lead campaigning groups is allowed to spend. And that puts those who want us to leave the European Union at a considerable financial disadvantage.
It's clearly an abuse of power, and I mean, it does show how desperate Project Fear is, but it's wrong. It's morally and democratically wrong, and the government's going to have to explain itself. The Prime Minister's going to have to come to the Commons and say, how on earth can this be fair?
Downing Street insists it's only doing what the Labour government of Harold Wilson did in 1975. It too sent a leaflet to all homes. Now, unlike Harold Wilson, David Cameron didn't sign his booklet. Maybe he fears not everyone will follow his lead. His officials insist all he's doing is responding to public pressure for more facts to help us make up our minds. The problem is there'll be many who say the government isn't giving us hard information, but just another opinion.
Robert, you say that it is controversial. Peter Bone told you it was an abuse of power. Will they get away with it?
Well, I asked Downing Street whether they thought that there was a risk that if those who want us to leave the EU went to the courts to seek an injunction, the government could be blocked from sending this leaflet, which is going to go to households first thing next week. Downing Street said they had taken legal advice. They think they're on pretty solid ground. But there's I think a sort of second issue which you're hinting at there, which is how will the public react? I spoke to a close colleague of Boris Johnson. He thinks the public will be hopping mad. He thinks that at a time when people want more money spent on the health service, more money spent perhaps on saving the steel industry, spending £9.3 million on what he thinks of as a propaganda leaflet will be seen as a waste of public money. Well, very difficult to read this one. I mean, I've been out actually talking to those who are going to be voting, people like you and me. Lots of people have said to me, actually, they are a bit bemused by all of this. So although I think the Prime Minister is taking a bit of a gamble here, there is a huge appetite from all of us for more information to help us make up our minds.
Robert, thank you.
Well, that ongoing row isn't the only one facing David Cameron at the moment. Today, he made a fourth statement in just 3 days over the Panama offshore tax scandal. Mr. Cameron said neither he nor his family will benefit in future from offshore funds, but there are still unanswered questions. Our political correspondent Lewis Vaughan-Jones is in Downing Street tonight. The Prime Minister under increasing pressure over this.
And Nina, you know you're in trouble when your clarification needs more clarification, and we have now had 4. So let's take a quick look at them. Starting back on Monday, the Prime Minister said, "This is a private matter. I will focus on what the government is doing." Fast forward to Tuesday and a bit more. "I have no shares, no offshore trusts, no offshore funds." Later on Tuesday, a little bit more, the Prime Minister, his wife and their children do not benefit from any offshore funds. And then today, there are no offshore funds and trusts which the Prime Minister, Mrs Cameron or their children will benefit from in the future. So there you have it, clear as you like. However, the Labour Party say he hasn't actually answered the question about whether he has benefited from funds like this in the past. And you imagine they will keep asking that question.
And the Chancellor facing some uncomfortable questions.
That's right. George Osborne not linked to the Panama Papers in any way, but he was asked about his affairs this morning. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Do you now, or will you in the future, benefit from any offshore funds?
Well, we've made very clear the arrangements that we had. They're all declared in the register and the like. But I thought it was very striking. You had a Labour Member of Parliament this morning praising the Prime Minister's leadership.
Are you going to benefit at all?
Well, we've, as I say, all of our interests as ministers and MPs are declared in the register of members' interests.
So George Osborne, they're not appearing not to directly answer the question, which then got people asking more questions. But a source in the Treasury has told me that there are no offshore interests, so the Chancellor doesn't have any of them. But this whole row is over transparency. It perhaps would have helped if the residents here would have been a bit clearer a bit sooner.
Lewis Vaughan-Jones, thank you.
Police have raided UEFA's offices in Switzerland after its former Secretary-General was named in the Panama Papers affair. Gianni Infantino, who is now president of FIFA, signed a contract with 2 businessmen who have since been accused of bribery. UEFA has denied any wrongdoing by itself or Mr. Infantino.
The relatives of 96 Liverpool fans killed in the Hillsborough disaster watched in court today as an inquest jury was sent out to consider its verdicts. The 2-year hearing has been the longest in British legal history, with evidence from more than 800 witnesses.
Jurors must now consider 14 key questions, including whether the police officer in charge, David Duckenfield, was responsible for their unlawful killing. Martin Geisler heard from some of the families, hoping that they'll finally see justice.
2 years, and they've barely missed a day. The Hillsborough family's making what's almost become a pilgrimage to the inquest that is finally nearing its conclusion. While the rest of the world has been going about its business, these people are still seeking answers and a means of healing the pain that is almost 27 years old, a pain they've relived with the evidence they've been hearing.
Just sitting through, listening to it is incredibly traumatic. And it's the AV footage, some of the stuff that I've seen, some of it I've seen for the very first time up in Birchwood, and it will never leave me. Never, ever leave me.
At a coroner's court specially convened in this sterile business park, they've each relived the most personal traumas. Now, finally, this difficult journey is nearing its end.
I will be very glad to see the whole procedure ending. It's been very wearing, and particularly the last few weeks, I think, on all the families.
The original inquest recorded verdicts of accidental death on all of the Liverpool supporters who perished on the overcrowded Hillsborough terraces. But the current jury will reach their conclusion in the knowledge of serious errors in the policing of the Cup semi-final and an attempt by the police to cover up those mistakes. They must answer 14 questions relating to events before and after the match. They'll look at how the police planned for the game and how they gathered evidence after the disaster unfolded. They'll also consider the role of the fans and the emergency services. But the biggest question they must answer is this: are you satisfied so that you are sure that those who died in the disaster were unlawfully killed? It is a weighty responsibility. Their conclusions will form the definitive record of how the Hillsborough disaster happened, how these 96 football fans died, and who, if anyone, was to blame.
Martin, this is obviously a huge task now in front of that jury.
Absolutely, Alistair. And to give you an idea of the scale of that task, consider this. They have been coming here, they have sat through, over these last 2 years, more than 300 days of evidence in this specially convened coroner's court here in Warrington. And as you said, they have heard from more than 800 witnesses in that time. Now they have to condense all that down. And that is why the coroner, Sir John Goldring, has given them this questionnaire. It contains those 14 key questions, those central issues that I mentioned in my report that he wants them to address. And he hopes that this will allow them to focus their minds during those deliberations. This has been a very difficult 2 years for everybody involved, the families clearly, some of whom have been coming here almost every single day. And don't forget for the jurors as well, who were selected, of course, at random. They're just members of the public and they have put their lives on hold, some of them their careers on hold for the last 2 years to do this, to do their civic duty and to hear this case and to come to these conclusions. The coroner reminded them of their responsibilities today. He reminded them they must act as a team together on this. He asked them to put any preconceptions out of their minds and to bear in mind only their evidence as they're reaching these conclusions. It may take them weeks yet, but at least, this does seem to be nearing an end.
Martin, thank you.
Figures obtained by ITV News show the number of junior doctors applying for a certificate to work abroad has surged since the Health Secretary decided to impose a new contract on them. It comes as medics across England hold their fourth strike in the bitter dispute with the government, as Neil Connery now reports.
Save our NHS! Save our NHS!
Junior doctors protesting in Southampton this morning on their fourth walkout across England in their long-running contract dispute. The 48-hour strike will see 5,000 operations and procedures postponed, but emergency cover will continue. These doctors say they've no choice.
We've seen the contract in print now, and we know more than ever that this contract is unsafe for patients. We know that it'll dilute safeguards against overworking doctors.
I'm more amazed about the fact that the government is still pressing ahead, despite all this resistance.
Good morning. We've got some figures, ITV News.
No comment from the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. Doctors are now preparing legal challenges to the government's decision to impose changes to their pay and conditions. The number of junior doctors applying for certification to allow them to work abroad has risen in response to the dispute. Figures obtained by ITV News show at the beginning of February this year, an average of 26 doctors a day were applying. But on the 11th of February, the day Jeremy Hunt announced his decision to force through the contract, that figure jumped to 297, with 106 applications on the following day.
Well, it's obviously going to be a difficult couple of days for the NHS, but I'm sure that it will pull all the stops out, as we've seen in the previous strikes.
36 charities have now written to both sides in the dispute, urging them to restart negotiations. The current standoff, they say, in the absence of any continuing negotiations, is not in the public interest. Whatever the current state of public opinion, there will be longer-term damage to public trust and confidence in the NHS. But the anger of junior doctors outside the Department of Health in London today shows there's little hope of compromise anytime soon. Neil Connery, ITV News.
Still to come on the evening news, the latest on the fight to save the steel jobs. The man behind the proposed Port Talbot deal says it may never happen.
And royal approval for Team GB as they prepare for the Invictus Games.
But first, the battle for the White House has burst back into life, with both frontrunners wounded by their rivals in Wisconsin. Donald Trump was well beaten by Ted Cruz, who heralded it a turning point in the Republican race. And Democrat Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports on how it's left the race to be president wide open.
Hillary, get ready. Here we come.
The victory was clear-cut, allowing Ted Cruz to pose as Hillary Clinton's likely opponent. But not so fast. One big question remains. Is this really a pivotal moment in the race?
Good morning. Turning point. A big win for Ted Cruz in Wisconsin deals a big blow to the Trump campaign.
Tonight, Wisconsin has lit a candle, guiding the way forward. Tonight, we once again have hope for the future.
If we do well here, folks, it's over.
On the eve of voting, Trump had hoped to wrap it up. But the man who wrote The Art of the Deal failed to seal the deal. The whole narrative of Trump's campaign, that he's a winner, is now in jeopardy. In a vitriolic response, he accused Cruz of acting as a Trojan horse for the establishment.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you doing that.
He's right in this sense. The anti-Trump campaign is coalescing around Ted Cruz, seeing him as the only viable alternative, and spending millions of dollars making that argument.
If you don't want Donald Trump to win, your choice comes down to this: math. Only Ted Cruz can beat Donald Trump.
The hand-to-hand combat is not limited to the Republicans. A strong win by Bernie Sanders last night kept his contest with Hillary Clinton alive.
With our victory tonight in Wisconsin, we have now won 7 out of 8 of the last caucuses and primaries.
Thank you. Hillary is wounded from that succession of losses, and this race for the presidency is still wildly unpredictable. Both frontrunners have been weakened. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump may still fight it out for the White House, but their rivals are closing in. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
The metals tycoon interested in taking over Tata's UK steel plants has warned ITV News the deal may never happen. Sanjeev Gupta is one of several potential buyers for the loss-making plants. Earlier, Business Secretary Sajid Javid met Tata's boss in Mumbai and revealed the sell-off will start on Monday. Our Wales correspondent, Rupert Evelyn, is in Newport outside one of Mr Gupta's steelworks. Still no positive news for British steelworkers.
There is no positive news. They are left simply waiting. In terms of what Sanjeev Gupta hopes that he can achieve, well, he believes that his business model to make this stuff steel is frankly better than anything else out there at the moment. But there is a big caveat with all of that. He hasn't got his hands on the books. He cannot see precisely what Tata are doing. And as a result of that, right now, he can't offer any guarantees. Are you a betting man?
No, I don't gamble. I'm a businessman, but I don't gamble personally.
But right now, looking at what you see and understand, I know you think you have a plan that can work, but you haven't got your hands on the books yet, have you? You haven't been able to see what's... And it's very early days. It's entirely possible that what you hope for will never happen.
Entirely possible.
And therefore you can't really offer the hope yet to the workers that you perhaps, I think want to do.
I think what I would like to do is to clearly show that there is another way, and for that to be examined by everybody.
Well, in terms of what the Business Secretary was doing today, his visit to Mumbai really delivered very little on detail other than the formal sales process will begin on Monday. Now, whether any of this is of any reassurance to steelworkers who work for Tata, well, frankly, it's unlikely. They are very nervous about what they're hearing at the moment, and frankly, they're not entirely sure that Mr Gupta can deliver on what he's suggesting.
Rupert Evelyn, thank you.
The world faces an unrelenting march of diabetes, according to a major report published today. The World Health Organization says the disease now affects almost 1 in 11 people across the globe. The condition's linked to unhealthy lifestyles and can lead to heart attacks and amputations.
A man accused of murdering a Glasgow shopkeeper has issued a statement claiming the killing was religiously motivated. Tanvir Ahmed appeared in court today, charged with murdering Asad Shah outside his store. He made no plea, but his lawyer released the statement after the hearing.
And Gucci adverts breached rules for using an unhealthily thin model. The Advertising Standards Authority has ruled the advert cannot be used again.
And finally tonight, Prince Harry has unveiled the team of injured veterans and serving men and women who'll be battling for Britain in next month's Invictus Games.
The Prince has been the driving force behind the Paralympic-style event, which this year will be held in Florida. Our royal editor Tim Ewart reports.
The Invictus Games are a testament to the determination of the wounded veterans taking part and to the sheer force of Prince Harry's personality. He inspired the first Games in London 2 years ago and took part in a celebrity wheelchair rugby match. The UK team for the second Games in Florida next month assembled at Buckingham Palace today, with Harry centre stage.
Over the past few years, he's made it his business to understand the journeys of recovery that these men and women have taken, and he understands how important sport can be as a vehicle for recovery.
Harry recently described himself as the voice and champion of Britain's injured veterans. He's no longer a soldier himself, but his heart still lies with the military.
3 years ago, Harry trekked to the South Pole with wounded veterans, and on a fundraising walk last year, he said he wanted to highlight the plight of those with unseen psychological injuries.
Of course, we need to do more, not just with these guys, but with everybody. Mental health is a sensitive subject, I think, amongst a lot of people, but it doesn't need to be. I think we need to talk about it more.
Today, among the physically wounded were several with brain damage and post-traumatic stress disorder, like Iraq veteran Caroline Buckle. The Invictus Games are transforming her life.
I'm proud. I'm so proud to be able to wear the Union Jack again in another country and representing my home country, doing sports, which I never thought I'd get to do again, and not at this level. And people believing in me. It's massive.
Thank you for coming. Prince Harry is already working on the third Invictus Games, due to be held in Canada next year. Tim Ewart, ITV News, Buckingham Palace.
Our top story tonight, anger over the Prime Minister's decision to spend £9 million of taxpayers' money to support his view that Britain should stay in the EU.
Whilst we've been on air, the leading out campaigner Boris Johnson has given his reaction.
Look, if this thing was genuinely going to help people to understand what is going on in the debate, there might be a case for it. But given that I think it's very likely that it will be very biased and hysterical and warning unnecessarily about the risks of leaving the EU, I think it's a complete waste of money.
And that is it for now. Raggy Omar will have more of that and the rest of the news at 10.
But from all the team here for now, have a very good evening.
Bye-bye.